From the vast reaches of the galaxy, we had watched Earth for centuries, silently observing its inhabitants through the haze of time and space. We, the Tsark, were known across the cosmos for our scientific curiosity and insatiable need to understand the universe. Our species had developed the means to peer into the farthest corners of the cosmos, to study worlds and civilizations from afar. Yet, there was something about Earth and its inhabitants that intrigued us more than any other. This small, blue planet orbiting a middle-aged star Sol held mysteries we could never quite explain, and among those mysteries, the humans stood out. What fascinated us most was their relationship with the very star that provided life to their world. Sol, while not an exceptionally unusual star, was far too volatile for any species that hadn't evolved to survive its intense radiation and occasional violent outbursts. We had seen solar flares erupt from its surface, releasing massive surges of deadly radiation capable of scouring planets of all life. Yet, despite this danger, the humans continued to live on the surface of their world, and what bewildered us even more was the fact that they appeared to embrace the very source of their potential destruction. It was from our observation post just beyond Earth's atmosphere that we first saw them. Humans, by the hundreds, lay out in the open, basking under the light of their star. They stretched on beaches, rooftops, and even grassy fields, their bodies exposed to the sun's brutal rays. Despite the constant warnings of the dangers of sun exposure, despite their own scientific knowledge of the radiation risks, they continued. It was as if they were drawn to it, not out of ignorance, but out of an inherent need. We studied their behavior for years, trying to understand why they would risk their fragile existence in this way. What struck us first was their physical vulnerability. Their skin, so sensitive to solar radiation, could burn within minutes under direct exposure. We watched as they smeared strange pastes, which they called sunscreen, on their bodies in an attempt to protect themselves. It seemed so rudimentary, so primitive, and yet, despite the futile attempts at protection, they kept returning to the sunlight, seemingly undeterred by the fact that their bodies would often redden, blister, and peel. Some appeared to even take pride in their tan, as though the very burn that left their skin cracked and sore was somehow a mark of achievement. Our observations led us to conclude that the humans were either oblivious to the true risk or had simply learned to accept it as a part of their existence. It was impossible to believe they were unaware. Their technology was advanced enough to warn them of solar storms and radiation bursts, yet they still chose to expose themselves to the sun. It was almost as though the human mind, in its complexity, had decided that the benefits of sun exposure outweighed the dangers. Perhaps they sought vitamin D, that mysterious compound essential to their biology, or perhaps the act of sunbathing was more psychological than physiological. Regardless of the reason, we were compelled to watch. Over time, we observed patterns in their behavior. They would gather in large groups when the weather was favorable, laughing, talking, and playing in the sunlight. It was a strange ritual to us, one we could not fully comprehend. And yet, there was something undeniably compelling about it. They did not fear the sun. They did not cower from its power. Instead, they celebrated it, embraced it as part of their existence. In their eyes, the sun was not a threat to be avoided, but a force to be confronted, and, in some strange way, cherished. For the Tsark, a species that prided itself on scientific understanding, this was a behavior that defied all logic. This was not simply an act of survival. It was something more, a form of defiance, perhaps, or an acceptance of the inevitable. In the face of a deadly star, humans chose to live, even at the risk of their own destruction. It was this strange paradox that left us utterly fascinated. They were fragile, yes, but in their fragility, they displayed a resilience we had never seen before. And so we continued to watch, puzzled, intrigued, and drawn into the mystery of these strange beings who dared to sunbathe under a star that could burn them alive. As the days passed, our fascination with the humans deepened. From our distant vantage point, we could see them in their daily routines, going about their lives as though nothing could harm them. It wasn't just the sunbathing that intrigued us, it was the way they lived in such apparent disregard of the dangers surrounding them. Even when their technology warned them of solar flares, they would continue their activities, seemingly unaware or simply indifferent to the cosmic forces at play. The more we observed, the more we became captivated by their behavior, especially their relationship with their sun. One pattern that began to emerge was how the humans would engage in their sunbathing rituals, even when the sun's radiation surged. We had thought they would seek shelter when these flares erupted from the star. Their technology had advanced enough to predict such occurrences, and their own scientists had long since studied the risks of prolonged sun exposure. Yet, there they were, lying in the open, basking in the rays as if nothing were amiss. It was incomprehensible to us. Even though we had seen civilizations across the galaxy rise and fall, none had ever displayed such behavior. How could they be so careless? How could they choose to expose themselves to a radiation storm, knowing the harm it could cause? There was a sense of rebelliousness about it, a willingness to confront the inevitable, even in the face of annihilation. It reminded us of ancient civilizations we had observed in other systems, where beings pushed the limits of their existence out of necessity, curiosity, or sheer pride. But these humans, these tiny, fragile creatures, did not act out of necessity. They did not need to sunbathe for survival. They could, in theory, stay indoors, shield themselves from the sun's most dangerous rays, and still thrive. And yet, they chose otherwise. Their behavior seemed to defy everything we knew about survival instincts. The Tsark had studied the biological imperatives of countless species across the galaxy, and one fundamental rule always held true to survive was to avoid unnecessary risk. But for the humans, the risk seemed to be an essential part of their existence. They did not merely survive, they lived with purpose, even when that purpose led them to take risks that could shorten their lives. What we hadn't fully grasped was the cultural aspect of this behavior. In the years we had watched, we began to understand that for the humans, sunbathing was more than just an act of exposure. It was a social event, a ritual, a way of connecting with one another and with the natural world around them. They gathered in groups, families, and friends, all basking together in the warmth of the sun. It was a celebration of life itself, a reminder that, despite the dangers they faced, they were alive. There was joy in their faces as they lay on the sand, their laughter echoing across the beaches. Even as their skin reddened and blistered under the sun's heat, they remained in high spirits, unconcerned by the risks. We began to wonder if their need for sunlight was less about its biological effects and more about its psychological significance. Could it be that, in a universe so vast and indifferent, the sun was a symbol of something far deeper, a sense of connection, belonging, and defiance? Was it their way of saying, "We are here, and we will not be erased by the forces beyond our understanding"? We watched as they continued their rituals, and slowly, a new theory began to form in our minds. Perhaps the humans were not just careless or reckless. Perhaps they were embracing life in all its raw, fleeting beauty. They seemed to understand something we had never fully grasped about existence, that life itself was fragile, and it was in the facing of danger, in the dancing with death, that they found meaning. For the first time, we found ourselves intrigued not just by the physicality of their actions, but by the deeper currents of meaning that seemed to guide their every move. We had assumed they were foolish. Now, we weren't so sure. As we continued our observation, we grew increasingly perplexed by the complex web of human behavior surrounding their sunbathing rituals. There was something in the way they approached the sun that transcended mere survival or even ignorance of the risks. It became clear that their relationship with Sol, their star, was tied to more than just biology. It was woven deeply into the fabric of their social lives, their psychology, and their very identity. We had initially thought the humans were simply unaware of the dangers they faced. Perhaps, we speculated, their biological imperatives were at play. They needed sunlight to produce vitamin D, an essential compound for their bodies. We knew their biology relied on it, but the necessity of sunlight did not seem to fully explain their behavior. After all, their technology had advanced to the point where they could engineer artificial sources of light and heat. They could theoretically live their entire lives indoors, safe from the sun's dangers, yet they chose not to. It seemed to be more than just a biological need. There was a social element to it, a shared experience that drew them out into the open, even when the sun's radiation was at its most intense. Groups of humans would gather on beaches, in parks, or even on rooftops, basking together under the potentially lethal rays. They interacted, talked, laughed, and played, their laughter carrying over the land, as if they were entirely unaffected by the deadly radiation storm that might be ravaging the upper atmosphere. This communal behavior intrigued us. It wasn't simply the act of sunbathing itself that fascinated us, but how it functioned as a shared ritual, a bonding experience that seemed essential to their way of life. We noticed that some of them actively sought out sunburns, a phenomenon we had initially thought to be a misunderstanding of their own biology. But as we observed them more closely, it became apparent that they wore their sunburns like badges of honor. They compared their tans, exchanged stories about their skin's redness, and even found pride in the pain of their burns. They had a strange relationship with their own suffering, one that was intertwined with their sense of accomplishment and pleasure. It was as if they were willing to endure physical pain and damage to experience a greater sense of joy, community, and connection to the natural world around them. In our analysis, we began to question the nature of their suffering. To us, it seemed counterproductive and even illogical. Why would a species, so intent on preserving itself, willingly expose itself to a harmful force? But there was a deeper complexity to this question that we had not considered before. Perhaps this pain was not just a physical response, but a psychological and social one. By enduring the harshness of the sun's radiation, the humans seemed to affirm their resilience, their ability to face the very forces of nature that could destroy them, and still emerge triumphant. It was as if the more the sun beat down upon them, the more they proved their capacity to endure, to survive, and to thrive. We also began to notice the individual variations in their sunbathing habits. Some humans wore protective clothing or shaded their faces with hats, while others exposed their skin fully to the sun's rays, basking without a care in the world. It was as though they approached the sun in a highly personal way, each one seeking a different balance between risk and reward, pleasure and pain. There was a freedom in how they interacted with the sun that we had never seen in any other species. It was as though they were engaging in a form of self-expression, crafting their own relationship with the world around them. The more we studied them, the more we realized that what we had initially perceived as reckless behavior was actually a complex, layered response to the forces of nature. The sunbathing was not simply a careless exposure to radiation, it was a deliberate act, a choice, and in some strange way, an affirmation of their existence in a universe that was often indifferent to their survival. The humans had found a way to make peace with the very forces that could destroy them, and in that acceptance they seemed to find purpose and meaning. Their relationship with the sun was not one of fear, but of coexistence, however brief it might be. What we had failed to understand, at first, was that the humans were not simply trying to survive. They were trying to live fully, completely, and without hesitation. It was in their defiance, in their ability to face the sun and embrace it, that we saw the true measure of their strength. They were not afraid of the sun's radiation, nor were they blind to its dangers. They had simply chosen to live in harmony with it, to take the risk in the name of something greater, life itself. As our observations continued, we began to notice something that both baffled and intrigued us even further. The humans seemed to respond to the sun's radiation with an almost ritualistic intensity. We had initially thought their behavior was driven solely by a biological need or perhaps an instinctual urge to challenge nature. However, as we spent more time analyzing their actions, it became clear that their relationship with the sun was not purely functional. It had evolved into something much more profound, something woven deeply into their cultural identity and social practices. The rituals associated with sunbathing were varied and complex. Groups of humans gathered together, sharing in the experience of basking beneath the potentially deadly rays. These gatherings were not isolated events but were often planned with enthusiasm, as though the sun itself was the focal point of their communal activities. There was a sense of joy and celebration that radiated from them, and it was difficult to comprehend the depth of this connection. The humans seemed to have transformed an inherently dangerous act into something positive, almost sacred. What struck us as particularly curious was their tendency to gather in large groups during certain times of the year, as if there were a shared cultural understanding that the act of sunbathing needed to be experienced collectively. They would lay out in parks, beaches, and even open fields, their bodies exposed to the sun in a communal display of vulnerability. They were not merely seeking warmth or light, they were engaging in an act of social bonding. In this strange connection to the sun, they had found a way to unite with one another, to share in the fleeting beauty of their world, and perhaps to stave off the knowledge of their own mortality. In these gatherings, there was an underlying sense of defiance. They seemed to be saying, "We will not hide from the world, from the forces that could destroy us." They didn't just survive the sun, they celebrated it. It was as though the radiation that could burn their skin or even bring about their demise was, in some strange way, a symbol of their resilience. Their bravery, it seemed, was not in avoiding death but in facing it directly. The humans appeared to find a strange beauty in the danger itself, embracing it as an integral part of their existence. We observed how some would laugh and play in the sun, while others remained still, eyes closed, seemingly meditative. It was as if the sun, in all its glory and power, was a source of comfort and empowerment. They weren't just accepting the risk, they were welcoming it. This profound connection to their environment left us questioning the nature of fear itself. What drove them to celebrate the very force that could annihilate them? Was it the same impulse that drove them to climb mountains, to travel vast distances across the oceans, or to reach for the stars themselves? Perhaps, in their way, the humans saw their own vulnerability as a source of strength. Our understanding of their behavior deepened when we observed the patterns in their response to the sun's more intense surges. During solar flares, when the radiation from Sol became more potent and unpredictable, we had expected the humans to retreat, to seek shelter from the inevitable onslaught. But instead, they seemed to do the opposite. As the flare intensified, more humans ventured outside. They didn't scatter in fear, they gathered, drawn to the very thing that could harm them. This instinct to unite in the face of a common threat, to face the sun together, seemed to transcend logic. It was an act of unity, a collective acknowledgement that their lives were fragile, yet beautiful for that fragility. It was as if the sun had become a symbol for their entire species, a metaphor for life itself. The radiation storms that periodically battered the planet were not just dangers to be feared, they were reminders that the humans, like all life, were finite. Their response to the sun, in this way, became an expression of their humanity. They did not simply accept their mortality, they embraced it. The collective ritual of sunbathing, whether in the face of danger or safety, became a form of resistance against the harshness of the universe. They chose to live in the moment, regardless of the risks. We had misunderstood the humans for so long. Their behavior was not a simple act of folly, it was an expression of life itself, of how they saw their existence. They faced the sun as a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, they could still find joy, purpose, and connection. The sun was not their enemy, it was their companion, however fleeting it might be. In that moment of exposure, they were alive, and that was enough. As we continued to observe, we began to delve deeper into the psychological and emotional dimensions of human sunbathing. It became increasingly apparent that their relationship with the sun was not only an act of defiance or a cultural ritual, but also something deeply tied to their understanding of themselves and the world around them. Their sunbathing, we realized, was an act of affirmation not just of life, but of their identity, their connection to the earth, and even to each other. The more we watched, the more we understood that the sun was not merely an external force to be reckoned with, it had become a mirror for their internal struggles and triumphs. The humans, it seemed, viewed the sun as something both beautiful and dangerous. They understood its potential to destroy, yet they reveled in its light, its warmth. To them, the sun symbolized something larger than the mere physical phenomena. It was a symbol of vitality, hope, and the fleeting nature of existence. In their daily exposure to its rays, they faced their vulnerability, and in doing so, they found a sense of purpose, a recognition of their own fragility. We began to see that sunbathing was often a form of personal reflection. Many humans would lie on the grass, eyes closed, absorbing the sunlight not just for its warmth, but for its emotional significance. There were moments when we observed them lying still, as if in deep thought, their bodies exposed to the sun's burning touch, yet their minds far away. It was as though the act of sunbathing provided them with a space to reconnect with themselves, to quiet their busy lives, and to simply be. In this simple, exposed act, they appeared to find solace, as though the harsh radiation of Sol was a cleansing force, stripping away the distractions of their lives and leaving them in a state of pure existence. Some of the humans, we noted, seemed to actively seek moments of discomfort. They stretched out in the direct sunlight, not bothering to shield themselves from its intensity. They deliberately exposed their skin to the elements, embracing the physical sensations of heat, discomfort, and even pain. It was almost as though they found meaning in enduring the sun's power. Their resilience was not just physical but mental. They allowed themselves to feel the full force of the sun's rays, not as a form of punishment but as a way of proving to themselves that they could endure, that they could overcome. It was a kind of psychological challenge, where the goal was not to avoid pain but to learn from it. We began to realize that this behavior was not limited to the sun alone. It was a reflection of the human approach to life itself. In everything they did, there seemed to be an undercurrent of facing adversity with open arms. The humans willingly placed themselves in challenging situations, whether in their personal relationships, their ambitions, or their ventures into the unknown. They were not a species defined by fear or avoidance. Rather, they sought to confront life head-on, no matter how difficult or dangerous it might be. The sun, in its unrelenting power, was simply one of many challenges they encountered. It became a metaphor for their entire existence, an acknowledgement that life, by its very nature, was fragile and unpredictable, yet full of moments worth experiencing. As we observed more closely, we began to see the role that sunbathing played in the human sense of community. It wasn't just about individual experiences, it was about shared moments. Families, friends, and strangers alike gathered in the sunlight, collectively participating in a ritual that bound them together. They laughed, played games, shared stories, and in those fleeting moments of exposure to the sun, they found a sense of connection to one another. It was as though the sun acted as a catalyst for human interaction, a force that encouraged them to come together in ways that went beyond mere survival. In a way, the sunbathing ritual was a communal affirmation of their shared humanity. As they lay exposed to the sun's rays, each individual was simultaneously alone in their thoughts, yet connected to the larger group. The sun created a shared space where the human experience, with all its joy, pain, and vulnerability, could be felt collectively. It was a celebration of life, but also of the awareness of its impermanence. By engaging in these acts of sunbathing, the humans seemed to be saying that they understood the transient nature of their existence, and yet they chose to embrace it with open arms, living fully in the present moment. They did not shy away from their mortality, they accepted it, even found meaning in it. In all of this, we realized that the human approach to sunbathing was not just a strange quirk of their species. It was a powerful statement about their view of the universe, their place within it, and their refusal to let fear of the unknown dictate their existence. The sun was their teacher, their challenge, and their ally. It illuminated not only the surface of their planet, but the very essence of their being. As we continued to watch the humans in their daily sunbathing rituals, something profound occurred to us, something that had remained elusive for so long. The humans, in their vulnerability and their willingness to confront the dangers of their environment, were not simply defying the sun. They were embodying a deeper truth about life itself, that existence, by its nature, was fleeting, fragile, and filled with uncertainty, yet it was also a source of profound beauty and meaning. This realization began to change the way we perceived them. No longer were they simply an anomaly, a species that recklessly exposed itself to solar radiation. They were a species that, in their very essence, seemed to understand the transient nature of life and had chosen to embrace it. In our studies of countless civilizations across the cosmos, we had encountered many species with a deep understanding of their mortality. Some of these species, like the Hereths from the Exelian system, sought to escape death through technological means, creating vast networks of machines that would preserve their consciousness beyond the physical realm. Others, like the Anari from the Veldith galaxy, embraced meditation and asceticism, seeking to transcend the physical world altogether. But none had done so in quite the same way the humans did. The humans didn't seek to escape death. They didn't try to outrun it or overcome it. Instead, they seemed to find meaning in its inevitability, in the very knowledge that one day they would be gone. This realization, in turn, infused their lives with a sense of urgency, a drive to live fully in the present, no matter the risks. We began to notice a change in the way they interacted with the world around them. In the moments when they lay in the sun, basking in its warmth or enduring its burn, we saw something more than just an acceptance of their vulnerability. There was a kind of reverence in the way they allowed the sun to touch their skin, as if they understood that it was a fleeting gift, something they could not hold onto forever. It wasn't just about the sun, it was about everything. Every moment was precious, fragile, and worthy of living. Whether they were engaged in their sunbathing ritual, spending time with loved ones, or embarking on some grand adventure, the humans were fully immersed in the experience of being alive. They weren't just surviving, they were living. This understanding of life's transience seemed to be deeply embedded in their culture. It manifested in their art, in the stories they told, in the music they created. The humans often spoke of the beauty of the present moment, an idea that resonated through much of their literature and philosophy. In their eyes, the present was the only thing that truly mattered. They weren't concerned with the past, which had already faded away, nor were they obsessed with the future, which remained uncertain. The present, fleeting as it was where they found meaning. And the sun, in all its brilliance and danger, became a symbol of that very moment, the here and now, full of light and warmth, but also tinged with the knowledge that it would eventually fade. There were moments when the humans' approach to sunbathing seemed almost poetic. We observed how they would revel in the sensations of warmth, sometimes turning their faces toward the sky, eyes closed, their skin soaking in the rays, as if they were absorbing the very essence of existence. For them, it was not just a physical act, it was a spiritual one. It was a reminder that they were alive, that they could feel, that they could experience the world in all its complexity. Even when the sun's rays became too harsh, too intense, they would not retreat. They would simply adjust, find shelter, and return again, as if to say, I can take this. I am here, and I will keep living. We also began to notice that their rituals were not solely about the individual experience. Humans often invited others into their sunbathing moments, whether with friends, family, or even strangers. It was a shared experience, an act of bonding. They would sit together, often in silence, but there was a shared understanding between them. They knew that, in those moments, they were part of something greater, something larger than themselves. The sun brought them together, creating a space where their individual lives merged into a collective sense of being. It was in these moments that we saw the true depth of human connection and acknowledgement that, despite their inevitable end, they were not alone. The sun, in this way, was not just a dangerous force or a biological necessity. It had become something more. It was a mirror for the human's understanding of life, death, and everything in between. It was the perfect reflection of their worldview, fleeting, powerful, and full of light, but ultimately destined to fade. The humans didn't run from this truth. Instead, they welcomed it, embraced it even, and in doing so, they created a culture of living that transcended mere survival. It was a celebration of existence itself, and in that celebration, they found their greatest strength. As the days passed, we began to truly understand the intricate layers of the human's relationship with the sun, a relationship far more complex than we had initially believed. It wasn't merely about survival or cultural rituals, it was about something deeper, something rooted in their very consciousness. Their sunbathing, though seemingly reckless, was a profound act of connection to their environment and each other. In a universe that often seemed indifferent to the fates of its inhabitants, the humans had found a way to assert their presence in the world, to leave a mark on the ephemeral nature of life itself. In their sunbathing, they were not simply basking in warmth or exposing themselves to danger, they were acknowledging their vulnerability. They were confronting the fact that their time on this world and in this universe was limited. This understanding, rather than causing them to retreat in fear, pushed them to live more fully. It was a paradox, one that we had come to respect. In facing their mortality, the humans had not only learned to accept it but to transcend it. They were not defined by the specter of death, they were empowered by the knowledge of its inevitability. We began to see how their sunbathing rituals were a form of celebration and embrace of existence itself. It wasn't about the sun alone, it was about life, in all its messiness and fragility. Each moment spent under the sun was a statement, I am here. It was a declaration of life in the face of death, a testament to the humans' unwavering desire to experience every aspect of their existence, no matter how fleeting or painful. Their willingness to endure discomfort, even pain, for the sake of a few moments of pure connection with the world around them, was a form of courage that we had not fully appreciated before. As we observed, we began to understand that their sunbathing rituals were not just a way to deal with the risks posed by their sun. They were a way to engage with the world on a visceral, emotional level. The humans lived in a constant state of awareness of their vulnerability, yet they refused to be paralyzed by it. Instead, they used that vulnerability as a source of strength, a driving force that pushed them to seek out joy, connection, and beauty in every moment. It was a worldview that seemed alien to us, but it was also one that we could not help but admire. The sun was both an adversary and an ally to the humans, and their relationship with it had come to symbolize something greater than just their physical survival. It embodied their philosophy of life to embrace the present, to experience the fullness of existence, even when faced with uncertainty and risk. The radiation that could scorch their skin also illuminated their capacity for joy, for community, for connection. Their willingness to expose themselves to that radiation was not an act of foolishness but an act of love for the world, for each other, and for the fleeting time they had. We had witnessed the way the sunbathing rituals brought humans together, fostering a sense of shared purpose and unity. They were not solitary in their acts. They came together in groups, in families, in friendships, all drawn by the same irresistible force, the desire to experience the world in its most unfiltered, raw form. In their sunbathing, they found not just warmth, but a sense of belonging, a connection to something far larger than themselves. They weren't just surviving, they were living, deeply, fully, without reservation. It became clear to us that this was a species that understood the significance of their existence, even in the face of its brevity. Their rituals, no matter how dangerous or seemingly absurd, were a celebration of life in all its forms, its contradictions, its joys, its hardships. The sunbathing was not just about facing the sun, it was about facing life itself. And in that facing, they had found something truly remarkable, a way to live with purpose, joy, and above all, a deep sense of connection to the world and to each other. In the end, we realized that the human sunbathing wasn't just an act of enduring the sun's radiation. It was an act of embracing it, a defiance not against nature, but against the very notion that life should be spent in fear or hesitation. They chose to live fully, with all the risks and rewards that came with it. The sun, with all its power and danger, had become a symbol of their existence, intense, fleeting, and full of light. And in that light, they had found a way to thrive.